A good Erev Shabbos. This week marks year's end, really. Let me count the ways. The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah explains that Nisan, the month of Nisan, is the beginning of the year for holidays. So when the Torah tells us to make a festival of unleavened bread, Chag HaMatzos, in the first month, on the 15th day of that month, the month of springtime, that's Nisan. It's being talked about. Nisan is the first of the months. So the one that comes right before Nisan must be the last of the months. That's Adar, and we are in the middle of Adar right now. The last holiday in the Jewish calendar then is Purim. It's the last holiday talked about in Shulchan Aruch, the end of the year. It's the last of the holidays to be included in the annual calendar. And it's usually hilarious. It's usually a lot of fun. We dress up in costumes, we make noise, eat and drink, make merry for all intents and purposes. It's the gala ending to the year, the closing party, when we even allow ourselves an extra glass of wine or two to celebrate. This Purim is the last holiday of our year of COVID-19. Think back to last Purim. It seems like 10 years ago, not one. Last Purim was the last time we had anything near normal. We had costumes, we had Megillah, we had Hamantash and pizza, ice cream. We had one more Shabbos with Kiddush and everything, and then we packed it in. We locked the doors. Nothing has been normal since then. Purim's the last holiday that we have not yet experienced under quarantine. So in the coming week, we're going to check that box. We'll get that last little punch in our ticket this week. We will do our best to make a minyan in Shul Thursday night and Friday morning to hear the Megillah. And for those who can't make it to Shul, we will put that on Zoom. And remember to make a festive Purim meal on Friday. Send Mishloach Manot, which is 2 foods to 1 friend at least, maybe not too much more than that, considering the stay-at-home order. And remember to give a lot of tzedakah. I can help you with that, as long as you let me know in advance. On the Shabbat before Purim, we read Parshas Zachor, 3 verses from Deuteronomy chapter 25 that remind us to wipe out the memory of Amalek. It's a Torah mitzvah to blot out the memory of Amalek, the eternal foe of the Jewish people, as those verses themselves say. You can take a look. As it's a challenge to get to Shul these days, there are alternate ways to fulfill this mitzvah. Best is to take out a chumash and read it yourself out loud. We don't make any brachas before or after. Just read those 3 verses in Hebrew and English if possible, and have in mind the mitzvah of wiping out the memory of this eternal enemy of the Jewish people. The verses are Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17, 18, and 19. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, how he encountered you on the way and cut down, all the weak who straggled behind you when you were tired and exhausted. They did not fear God. Therefore, when God gives you peace from all the enemies around you in the land that God, your God, gives you to settle in as an inheritance, you shall surely obliterate the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. That's the entire text, and it's also in the Siddur, usually after Shacharis and most Siddurim, in the collection called the 6 Remembrances. You'll find it in our Siddur that we use in Shul on page 176, 177, and we have a short video of the passage being read out of a Sefer Torah on our website, so you can hear what it sounds like. So listen to that, and then read it yourself over this coming Shabbat. On Purim itself, the main thing is hearing the Megillas Esther, as we remind ourselves every year, is the one book out of 24 in the entire Tanakh that doesn't mention God's name. However, it's in that very concealment that we feel the presence of God guiding history and orchestrating salvation for the Jews, as it always is and always will be. We listen to the Megillah being read or read it for ourselves on Purim if we can't get to a live reading, once Purim night and again during the day, Friday during the day. So Thursday night after the fast ends at 6:45 and again on Friday morning, we'll listen to or read for ourselves from the Megillah. We'll Zoom both of those readings, so at least you'll have a reminder of this mitzvah, even if not the real deal in person. We've discussed in the past the instruction of the Mishnah, Hakore es ha-Megillah lemafreya lo yatsa. If you read the chapters out of order, you miss the point, because you have to see the story unfolding step by step in front of you before your eyes as each element unfolds and develops. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh also explained that if you read it as if it's something in the past and not relevant to our times today, you've also missed the point. It's very important to hear every word, because each word carries a tremendous amount of meaning, as Rabbi Yonasan Ebershutz explains in what follows. The first chapter of the Megillah, there's a verse that says, Vayomer HaMelech LaChachamim Yodei Itim. The king, that's Achashverosh, said to the wise men who knew the times, Ki kein dvar HaMelech lifnei kol Yodei das v'din. For it was the king's custom to present a case to all who knew law and judgment. That's the quote. The Gemara in Megillah explains that wise men who knew the times refers, interestingly enough, to the Jewish sages who know about both how to establish the calendar, as we do, and also knew how to determine which years should be a leap year, with a second Adar in it. Not this year, but next year we will have 2 Adars, by the way. That's an interesting explanation, but it doesn't answer why Achashverosh would seek out the wisdom of the rabbis, particularly in the context of this Vashti incident, which is where this verse is mentioned. Listen to this complex and fascinating Yaros Devash. We know from that same Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah that told us that Nisan is the first of the months, that Tishrei is the month you count the reign of kings from, right? Tishrei is the month for kings. And the Gemara there explains that even extends to non-Jewish monarchs. So, even a king who acceded to the throne a few days before Tishrei, once the first of Tishrei rolls around, he's now considered in the second year of his reign. Now, in the Megillah, we're reading about what at the beginning of the story? We're reading about this banquet, this grand banquet that Achashverosh threw to celebrate himself mainly, which was in the 3rd year of his reign, and it began in Tishrei. Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz comments in Manos Alevi that a phrase we had a few verses earlier in the chapter, Yamim Rabim Shmonim U'Ma'as Yom, many days, it says there, 180 days. It seems to be repeating itself, but actually it's not so. Yamim, you remember it says Yamim Rabim. Yamim is 2, Yamim Rabim is 3 more, that's 5 altogether is what it means in his view. So Achashverosh started this 180-day festival, but he had a 5-day private party for his inner circle, his main backers, his top gifts, as it were, whatever it was. So starting from Tishrei and counting 5 days for the private party, then you add 180 days for the big shindig with the wine and the vessels from the temple in Yerushalayim and all that. We count a half year down the road and we get to the 7th day of Nisan. The next day there was the 7-day feast for the people of Shushan, and the last of those days, the day that Achashverosh called for Vashti, was none other than the 15th day of Nisan. It was Pesach. Vashti, if you recall, was the daughter of Belshazzar. You might remember him from Sefer Daniel, from the book of Daniel, or maybe from the song at the end of the Haggadah, Vayhi B'Chatzi Halayla, or maybe you saw the Rembrandt painting of his feast in the National Gallery in London. Belshazzar guessed, wrongly as it turned out, that God was abandoning the Jews and would never rescue us from exile. So Belshazzar reckoned himself the proper and forever owner of the vessels from the temple in Jerusalem, the Beis HaMikdash. So he made a feast to celebrate that quote-unquote fact, the biblical origin here for fake news. He made his feast on the 15th of Nisan to celebrate himself, but he failed to see the writing on the wall, quite literally, and was struck dead right at midnight. So on this night, Vashti happened to have yortzeit for her father, so her heart was heavy. Now Achashverosh loved Vashti and wanted to help her by explaining away why it was that she declined to appear at the banquet. So he did a little figuring, did a little reckoning. Since it was her father's yortzeit, he said it was maybe wrong of him to ask her even to show up on that day and should be given some slack. However, listen to this. If the 3rd year of Achashverosh's reign was a leap year, and it had an extra Adar in it, and this date when this banquet took place would not be in Nisan, it'd be Adar Sheni, because remember you add an extra month in. It would be 2nd Adar, and there would be no reason for Vashti to commemorate the yortzeit, because it wasn't this day, it's a month later. Remember we mentioned at the beginning of the story the consultation. Achashverosh consulted with the Chachamim Yodei Itim, the rabbis who knew how to set the calendar, including the leap years. That's why he asked them. That's why Achashverosh was so curious to speak to the calendrical experts. He wanted to make sure that it was a regular year this year and not a leap year. That would make the date of this whole incident actually the 15th of Nisan, which was Belshazzar's yortzeit, rather than the 15th of 2nd Adar, as it would be if it were a leap year. And therefore, Vashti's sad and mournful mood on the date of her father's passing was entirely appropriate, completely fitting. And it would make sense and be a justification for her not showing up when she was summoned. All this part of one phrase of one verse of the opening chapter of the Megillah. It's in there, but you have to look. And really, that's the message of the Megillah, and really the message of Purim. And while we're at it, the message of Yiddishkeit, and especially this crazy year that's coming to a close. And hopefully, with the coming of the month of springtime and the holiday of freedom, we'll start to experience the kind of freedom, most notably the freedom from fear and anxiety that so many of us have been feeling for so many months. The message is that it's in there, but it's very deep. You have to look. When we say everything's in the Torah, people say, where? In fact, the Gemara asked that very question about Esther in Tractate Chulin, Masechta Chulin. It says, Esther Batorah Minayin. Where is the Queen Esther hinted to, suggested, mentioned maybe? Where's the book of Esther in the Torah, in the Chumash? And the answer given there is from a verse in Devarim, in Parshas Vayelech. It says, Va'anochi hastir panai bayom hahu. I will surely conceal my countenance on that day, says God. The language hastir, you'll recognize it right away, is from the same root as Esther. And it's repeated twice to intensify its effect. Not just I will hide, but I will surely hide. That's how it's often rendered in the Queen's English. Or you could say it another way. It's a double concealment. That's why it says the word twice. Hashem says, I'm going to hide myself. I'm not going to be mentioned in the Megillah. And I will conceal the fact that I've hid. So the hiding itself, that fact of hiding itself is concealed. So you really have to probe deeply and have intention for what you're looking for in order to find it. Why? Why so hidden? Why not out in the open? It's a good question. Why all this that we've gone through in the past year? It's a good question. If I had an answer, I would share it. I would email it out. I would put it outside on the reader board on Bayview Avenue. I wouldn't keep it a secret. Believe me. But this we do know. When we look, and when we look deeply, we find meaning. So hopefully this Purim will be the last holiday we have to celebrate quietly, at home, alone, with no fanfare, with masks that we have to wear because the doctors tell us to wear them, rather than the masks we choose to wear because that's the custom on Purim. We dress up and we look back on this Purim and this winter and this whole year, and we'll say if we had to go through it, thankfully we came out not only healthy, but smarter and wiser and more dedicated, more devoted to what's important, and knowing that we've dug deep and found real and lasting meaning in challenging times. Good Shabbos, a Freilich and Purim, Chag Purim Sameach.